A patient has been known to cure himself entirely of extreme cases of nightmare by thinking while experiencing the nightmare, "Just what would I do if I were in the waking state?" He would have accomplished the same result more quickly had he thought what he would do were he in a perfect state of spiritual consciousness, and would have raised himself nearer to that state. If he would ask himself what he would accomplish if he could see directly through to the spiritual, it would become much simpler and more beneficial because it would be permanent. The breaking up of a nightmare becomes automatic if just before you go to sleep you declare that you are one with perfection. It has no chance to enter when you are in this state. This same practice can be applied equally to the so-called waking state. All negative conditions and difficult problems can be corrected and solved every time by this method. You will find it very practical to ask yourself, when faced with problems or apparent negative conditions, what you would do if you were in spiritual consciousness. Get rid of the complexities of earthly living in this way. It is really just as simple as that. To be still and know that I am God covers the case perfectly, for that is the completion of it all. And that other phrase, God is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before God and rejoice, is equally applicable. And again, in everlasting joy, all things have their birth. Joy is the very highest state. It is the exaltation of soul, as physical pleasure is the exaltation of the body. But it is the true emotional state of man, born from his inner release into the truth of his being. It is only when we get out of that condition of joy and harmony that we begin to get separated from the highest. You are going to hear a great deal of that talk in the coming years in all theological schools. It is quite remarkable how that is now being brought about, and how this change is manifesting even in the teaching of children to become harmonious and to let the turmoil around them go on as it pleases without becoming a part of it. The moment you train children to react to constructive ideals and band together to promote harmony, developing the mass instinct in this way, you are destroying the very root of all unhappiness, misery, want, and war in the world. Our past method has been to develop the sense of strife. The moment that someone acted in a manner that aroused any resentment or resistance, everybody else began to take on the same attitude. And in this way, we have been trained to develop the sense of strife. Only by reversing the process and getting back to the true state will we find our perfect social structure coming into the world. Now, I'm skipping over all through this book. There's For the Teacher, which talks about the different paragraphs that I read, but I don't read that. I'm going to skip over to the next one. You might want to get a hold of these books too. They're very cheap. If you can find them for as little as $2, some of them. But usually the set costs a little more. Next chapter is called God. People generally are interested in the Master's ideal of God and the location of God. We shall therefore consider this ideal in the present chapter. However, it will be impossible to consider their ideal without including man, for to them God and man are inseparable. The Masters talk of God considerably, but they consider it as one attribute of being. Being as one attribute or a single entity comprising the entire universal system, visible and invisible. The mind of man got its ideal of God through superstition about God. Man saw then nothing but the graven image. It was then necessary to bring him back to the realization that he is God, there being no separation between the individual and the universal. that man is an integral part of the whole and is identical in nature with the whole. They teach that God is right within man always, just as Jesus Christ taught. That is always the attitude and thought of the illumined. Man is God. That statement, I am God, is one of the most definite statements that men can use. We have never known them to give instructions in writing, but they do give oral instructions or oral talks. They do not call their talks instructions. They are simply stating facts, which are obvious, and they assume that the obvious should be known universally. Therefore, they do not teach, but merely confirm what all men instinctively know, and which is universally true. As a guide in individual progress, they suggest reading the Mahabharata, the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Gita. Okay, I know that one. This reading is suggested as preparation for one who desires to take the real inner work and for concentration. A few verses at a time are best. They never suggest reading a whole book through. They often read but one sentence in a whole day. The instructions given in the Gita are steps toward the accomplishment of individual perception of what God really is, and to really bring the individual into the consciousness of what it means. No man will actually know God until he himself experiences the realization of God within himself. No man knoweth the things of God except the Spirit of God, which is in him reveal them. The preparatory work prior to the discovery of the inner or secret doctrine, as it is sometimes called, is the result of training the mind to grasp that which is within the statements, for that is the inner work or inner doctrine. It is like studying to understand the meaning of a mathematical rule. The thought is that when one has trained himself to gain the knowledge of the inner meaning of the teachings of the Gita or the Bible or any sacred book, he is then in position to make an inner search of himself to find the inner meaning of his own being. Man is not a physical organism, but that inner self living through a physical organism. The inner work is finding the self which is the God self. There are so many orthodox conceptions today that hold to the theory that God is made in the image and likeness of man, instead of the truth that man is made in the image and likeness of God. But they think of man as physical rather than that which is back of the physical, the inner man. Man is really the image and likeness of God. If God is the sum of all things visible and invisible, the infinite one, the image of God, embraces all time and space, for there is nothing but God. Man could only be created in or within his image, for there could be no outside where men could be created. He subsists within the very image of God, as your thoughts exist within and live as an integral part of your mind. Not only is man created within this image of God or contained within the allness of God, but he is made of the very essence of the God nature, like unto it. If the cause is God, the effect is God in manifestation. Cause and effect must be one. Can there be thought without mind, and can there be mind without thought? The union of every condition brings man right back to God. He does not need to attain. He is God. That is wholeness of principle. The materiality of illusion is that which gets us into all kinds of difficulties and strife. In that complete unification of principle in man, we rise out of objectification entirely, as we know objectification. There is a pure manifestation of God, but it is not a material or limited objectification. It is a state of consciousness, expression of all that principle is. But that is not the slightest degree, there is not the slightest degree of separation